It's the Brad and John Show.
It is the Brad and John Show. This is January 2nd, 2025. Our first show of the new year, John. Good morning to you.
Happy New Year, Brad. How are things? What kind of a start is 2025 off to you for January 2nd today?
You don't want to know. You don't want to know.
My thoughts are with you, Brad.
Yeah.
Technical difficulties.
God, when it rains, it pours. Okay, first off, I have to say a couple things. This is our third year, even though we've done the show for, a year and, 2 months or something like that?
Yeah, it's technically, go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, we started in 23, we went all through 24, and now we're into 25. And do you hear this weird thing? I heard this yesterday. The new generation of kids started yesterday. Did you hear this?
No, I did not. Why is that?
As of January 1st, 2025, anybody born after that date or on or after that date is now called a beta.
Wow, what an unfortunate label to give someone.
I know. It's like, because if you understand what the term beta is used for, typically it's something that's done but not quite done. You know what I mean? It's like the beta version of it.
Yeah, it's in beta testing, or it involves an inferior male, like a blue pill type of guy,
That's John Combest, C-O-M-B-E-S-T. What he does is every single day of the year, and for 23 plus years, he puts together a list of all the important things you should know that's going on in the state of Missouri politically, just news items. Sometimes it's funny stuff. Most of the time it's sort of serious stuff. Sometimes it's Mark McCloskey stuff. Did I say it right again, Mark McCloskey?
Yeah, you're on a streak, Brad. You're on a streak.
2 in a row. But what he does in this morning show, and by the way, johncombest.com is where you need to check it out. It's like the Matt Drudge report of Missouri. Very similar thing. No fancy graphics, no video, none of that kind of stuff. Just hardcore headline stuff. You find stuff that's interest to you, you click on it, and takes you wherever that story's at. But we started off with this guy, and this guy's name is, what's your name again, sir?
I'm Casey Kasem.
And what do? You do certain things you do.
There's stories coming up.
He tells stories, and we start off with story number.
In third place.
As the plot thickens, it gives me the Dickens, reminiscent of Charles. Andre Benjamin, late 20th century philosopher, could have been talking about track 12 on his Outcast Aquemini, or he could have been, Brad, discussing the St. Louis Development Corporation. Been in the news a lot at the end of 2024, and there is a brand new twist to the plot. The former chief of staff, a woman by the name of Daffney Moore. Brad, it's kind of like the book title, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. This might be, I Know Why the Caged Chief of Staff Sings. Daffney Moore used to be chief of staff for St. Louis Development Corporation, but Brad, she got fired on New Year's Eve 2022. So a little more than a year ago. You say, John, people get fired on important days all the time. Look at Brad Hildebrand's radio career. True. However, Daffney was fired, according to her, because she was too much of a stickler about the monkey business going on with St. Louis development grants. And Brad, this is a timely lawsuit because St. Louis Development Corporation has not only been in the news a lot the last few months, but the head of the city, Tashara Jones, she's up for re-election. She probably wants to tamp down any sort of rumors that things aren't going great in the city. But Daffney Moore is suing, Brad, and she wants compensation for all of last year because she says she was fired for doing her job. There's also a couple other things she wants compensation for, Brad. She wants legal fees. She had to go see a therapist. This caused a lot of stress to her. So Ms. Moore wants to be compensated for that as well. Brad, this story was brought to us by KSDK. I have a link up to it today. It is, of course, by Mark Maxwell, and he includes the supporting documents. So, Brad, I guess the bottom line here is the plot thickens for St. Louis Development Corp, and that this isn't a case of now having a bunch of people who didn't get a big lump sum of money complaining. This is complaints from somebody who was actually on the inside, said she tried to do the right thing, and said she was punished for doing the right thing.
Okay, let me get this straight. She got fired over, a year ago, 2 years ago? What'd you say?
Yeah, a year and that would be a year and 3 days ago, I guess.
A year and 3 days ago, okay, because she got fired on New Year's Eve on the 22nd. So then, did you say the 22nd?
No, December 31st, 2022.
Yeah, but that would be 2 years ago.
Oh, you know what, Brad? Gosh, I'm sorry. You're right. That was 2 years ago. My mistake. That was, boy, my math is not mathing, as the kids say. You're right, Brad. That was 2 years ago she got fired.
Okay, so she got fired because she was essentially whistleblowing on what she thought was not good activity, some underhanded kind of stuff, some not legit kind of activity.
You're exactly right. So, and the good thing, if you're Daffney, the good thing that for, her legal argument, she seems to have keeping what the kids these days call receipts. She seems to have kept, if you look at the lawsuit, a track of who she met with, what was said in the meeting, and the other folks who were there in the meeting who can corroborate her version of events. And specifically, Brad, I think the most damning thing from her perspective is that when she met with not only the head of these, the head of the group that was actually giving out the money, the people that were actually giving out the money, but folks inside the organization in meetings gave her a hard time for being such a stickler and having to go by the exact language. So according to Daffney, there were people in the room who can corroborate, yeah, Daphne's bosses were even pointing out the fact that she pays too close of attention to the letter of the law. And then I guess the other thing is, Brad, she is alleging that folks in leadership at SLDC were meeting with consultants and clients, as I understand it, who were in line to get money. Now, this would seem to suggest that everybody was in cahoots together to say, okay, write your language this way and we'll be able to give you X, Y, Z. And if you have a outside private consultant in the room, I think to a lot of people that looks bad.
But and then what this is like, and I'm trying to get my hands around this. She then is fired, but then all this under the table kind of stuff comes out that there are people getting grants who are like relatives of people and people who don't even have any businesses. Yep. and businesses that are at a certain address, but there is no address at that, or no business at that address. We're talking on the same page now, right?
Absolutely. And so, Brad, my question when I first saw this was, when I saw her firing date, I thought, well, why would she wait this long? And I don't know, I'm not smart enough to know exactly when statute of limitations and all this stuff runs out. But it would seem as though she stayed pretty quiet, and then she sees all this shady stuff come to fruition, this alleged shady stuff come to fruition, and maybe she thinks, hey, St. Louis Development Corporation is on the ropes. And you know what, Brad? If I'm her, I think, facing a tough reelection, maybe Tashara Jones might lean on some people and get me a favorable settlement. I don't know.
Interesting. Who was that rep that put together the Better Together bill again?
Ian Mackey, yeah. Democrat, state rep.
Does he look a little bit more sus, as the kids would say now that all this stuff keeps coming out about why would the county, of course the county's got its problems as well too, why would the county merge this with this particular city when there's all sorts of crazy crap going on, especially if you saw what happened over the weekend at the bar, the wheelhouse, all sorts of weird stuff going on?
Yeah, I think that once they signed, in Ian Mackey's defense, once he was able to sign on Hamburg as a municipality that endorsed it from out in St. Charles County, I think it was a lock.
But you know what? If he had Tunerville, he would have a done deal. I mean, that would.
You know what else comes out of Tunerville? Maybe something in story number 2, Brad.
Up a notch to number 2.
Brad, after you get out of the studio, one of your favorite rituals is to go to Schnucks. You say hi to a homeless man out there. He rebuffs your free food. But you're not deterred. You go in there anyway. You love going into Schnucks. And if a state senator from the southwest part of the state has her way, next time you swing by Schnucks, well, maybe in 2026, you would be able to pick up a little bit of raw milk, Brad. Here's the skinny, not the full-fat version, but here's the skim milk version. State Senator Jill Carter from a town called Granby has raw milk legislation. And as I understand it, Brad, today you can't purchase raw milk at a grocery store. You can't just go in and pick it up next to, your Prairie Farms dairy milk or your generic milk. You have to either go to a farmer and get it, or the farmer has to deliver it to you. Under Jill Carter's bill, you wouldn't be able to buy it like you would a traditional gallon of milk. But under her bill, a farmer would be able to take it to a grocery store or a drop-off point, and then after you had contracted with the farmer to purchase the milk, you could go to that grocery store who's keeping it nice and cold for you, pick it up, and pay for it. So raw milk legislation, Brad, this seems to always be bubbling under. There have been some bills in the past in Missouri about this, but according to this piece, which is, by the way, from Jack Suntrup from the Post-Dispatch, there's been increased attention on this, renewed interest, thanks to Bobby Kennedy Jr., who is allegedly a raw milk advocate. What do you think of this, Brad?
You know, I scratch my head in this kind of stuff. Hold on a minute, I got a cough here. Sometimes it seems we go back in history. I wonder what Louis Pasteur would say about this. You know what I mean?
I think he would say this is great, but you still got to pasteurize it.
Right, that's what I'm saying. But
yeah, I know.
Is it that the whole deal is that when you're talking raw milk, we're talking literally out of the udder of the cow into your mouth. Essentially, that's what they're wanting. Correct? Isn't that what they want?
Yeah, that's correct. And let me interrupt too, Brad, because as you can imagine, a lot of groups are opposing this. So you have the Grocers Association, you have a number of agriculture groups, and their point seems to be we don't need to do anything to encourage disease-borne pathogens getting into your stomach or your kid's stomach. And the more we have raw milk circulating around, the more likely it is we're going to have foodborne disease, or we're going to have illness resulting from this.
You know, it's one of those things where, I talk about this all the time. The pendulum swings back and forth, and we get these things which are supposed to keep us safe, and then somebody comes along and says, I don't want to be safe. I just want to drink what I want to drink, which in this case is raw milk, right? I mean,
that's exactly right.
Well, all you got to do is you get an attorney on this and get the grocery store involved. They just got to sign, like a disclaimer, just an indemnification agreement, where essentially
indemnify. Yeah.
I will not hold the store or the farmer, liable if I get some nasty disease from drinking raw milk. Right? Simple as that.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know about you, Brad, but I want my milk pasteurized.
I see. The interesting thing about this is there's going to be people that go back 100 years, or when did Louis Pasteur do his thing? Do I dare to look that up?
Yeah, you can.
I'll tell you what. I'm going to number one. I'm going to look at Louis Pasteur when he came up with this stuff. Okay, here's John, and here's the big payoff for what John does every morning.
The number one.
Fox Business Morning with Maria. Brad, she wasn't taking New Year's off. She's not some sort of slacker on New Year's Eve. I think she took New Year's Day off. She didn't take New Year's Eve off. She had Congressman Mark Alford from the Kansas City area on, and he was talking about several issues, Brad. He was talking about immigration, and he was talking about Mayorkas. He called Alejandro Mayorkas. Alford called him, quote, the biggest liar since Pinocchio. That's how you could tell, by the way, that Mark Alford writes his own stuff, that Mark Alford's communication team doesn't write it, because nobody under 60 would make a Pinocchio analogy like as a punchline. But anyway, good for Mark Alford. Good for baby boomers. Mark Alford also says that he's supporting Mike Johnson for Speaker, and he had a curious line in there, Brad. I think that if you were just skimming the transcript, you might miss this. He said that, let's face it, Donald Trump is calling the shots of the Republican agenda. In other words, we can trust Mike Johnson because Mike Johnson is on board with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is calling the shots of the agenda. So I think if you're a big Trump supporter, but you don't like Congress, maybe you're a little bit more at ease because Alford says, look, we all know Donald Trump's running this whole show anyway.
So let me try to decipher this. Okay, so Mark Alford is essentially saying that he's in favor of Mr. Johnson as the Speaker of the House, and what's he saying about Trump again?
Because Trump is essentially, he used the phrase calling the shots, that Donald Trump is calling the shots, and we should trust Mike Johnson because Mike Johnson is a strong supporter of the Trump agenda.
Yeah, but didn't Mike Johnson and Trump cross swords just like last week on this?
Whoa, easy, Brad. I don't know that they were at two different urinals side by side.
Not that
but yeah, I think they might have crossed swords about a few things. But I think also too, Johnson says all the right things. And, there's a lot of conservatives that have had trouble with this continuing resolution. Mark Alford's point is also that Republicans need to get back to passing a real budget. And Alford had another interesting point, Brad, which I think is similar to things that you have said, which is if you're looking at a federal budget, there's always going to be stuff in there that you don't like. In other words, you're never going to get a perfect budget. So if you are Mr. or Mrs., I know everything that's in this budget and I'm against every possible misuse of money and silly spending, you are never going to get a good spending bill because there's always a little bit of junk in there. I guess Alford's point is no bill is perfect. Let's pass what we have now and then get on with the business of making the next one better.
So he would be against the shrimp on a treadmill, is what you're saying? Is that what you're saying as far as the money which would go for research for putting shrimp on treadmill? Remember that one?
I don't remember that specific line, but I did hear on another radio station that I'm going to try to not mention today. I did hear on another radio station about Rand Paul's Festivus list, like the Festivus complaint list that included a whole bunch of stuff of federal money going to influencers, et cetera.
So
have we talked about another radio station yet this year, Brad? I don't think we have.
You're not going to talk about 93.3? Is that what you're saying?
I've made my thumbnail. I did the best job I could trying to find a flattering and positive and good picture, which took a little bit of time. But you know what? I did the best I could with what I had to work with.
John, after you putting that thumbnail on, if you don't know what we're talking about, was this on Monday or Tuesday? We didn't work yesterday because of
Tuesday, yeah.
Yeah, Tuesday. We talked about the fact that John and another listener of the show, who shall remain nameless, we won't drag her through the mud, have been blocked on the 93.3 Real Talk 93.3 Twitter page, okay? And John has the screenshot of him being blocked. And what I find interesting about this is that 93.3, Tracy and Rick Ellis' station, tout themselves as being the voice of freedom, whereas you would think that when you say freedom, that all voices would be allowed, correct? But not John's, right? Not John.
All except for, and that's okay. Yeah. You know what? People can make the decisions they want to make. And as I always say, shout out to everybody there who's awesome, including, Brad, I don't know if you saw, but your piece about Dan Strauss was quite popular. If you look at that segment, the part of the segment that people most listen to is not John blabbing on about Missouri American water. It's Brad talking about Dan Strauss.
Well, and once again, he's a great guy. I have utmost respect for him. He's just a stand-up kind of guy and never in a bad mood, always in a good mood, would do anything to help anybody. Just one of those kind of guys.
I don't know, Brad. I heard that he needs to come to your studio and help you with a thing right at 8:01 o'clock, like a technical issue that you're having.
No,
that's what I heard.
He needs to come to the studio and get his stuff that is still at the studio from his wife, his ex-wife, dumping it in the parking lot at the radio station. But that's a whole other story.
And he needs to give me his ex-wife's number. I love crazy women, Brad.
She was definitely. Let me tell you, that one was interesting. And if you don't know what we're talking about, once again, here's the interesting thing about it is. And by the way, I've not only been blocked on Tracy Ellis's personal Facebook page, but I'm also blocked on the Twitter page as well, too. And the interesting thing about it is I'm not that much of a Twitter guy. I don't do that much tweeting and stuff like that. But the crazy thing about this is how much time do we talk about it? And you always talk about glowingly about what's the guy's name in the afternoon? Ryan Haidt, isn't that his name?
Yeah, Haidt's great. Drew Shelton in the morning's awesome, too. Yeah, hey, you know what? They're not responsible for Tracy's actions,
once again, I get so frustrated with this industry. I mean, and maybe next week I'll tell another story about another broadcaster who is being an absolute positive anal orifice to me, but that's neither here nor there. And I don't want to sound like, oh, Brad, everybody's beating up on Brad. It's to the point where, John, I keep saying it. I got to do it. I got to get the Rodney King. Can't we all get along? That's in the other studio. That I got to do that today because I got to be able to play that because that one fits in just perfectly. Okay, we're late. We're long on this one. We take a break, and I do have the Louis Pasteur stuff. We'll start with that next break.